The crystal chandeliers of Restaurant Lumiere cast prismatic patterns across white tablecloths as Julian Reinhardt surveyed the room with practiced indifference. At 42, the technology magnate had amassed a fortune that afforded him entry to the world's most exclusive establishments. Tonight? He'd chosen this Michelin-starred venue in Manhattan not for its renowned cuisine, but to impress his potential investors. "Your table is ready, Mr. Reinhardt," the Maître announced with a deferential bow. Julian nodded curtly, barely acknowledging the man as he led his 4 associates to a prime corner table. His company's latest venture, a revolutionary AI platform, was already generating buzz, and these men represented capital he didn't need, but wanted nonetheless. Business was, after all, well, just another game of dominance. Their waitress approached with a warm smile that Julian found irritatingly authentic. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Amelia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." She appeared to be in her late 20s, with intelligent hazel eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. Nothing remarkable, Julian thought, just another service. Worker surviving in an expensive city, as Amelia described the evening specials with unexpected eloquence. Julian grew impatient. When she finished, he turned to his companions with a smirk. "Dies beating nung in worden, Emer Hubscher, Aber Leiter, Nicht Kluger. Wahrscheinlich hat Sie keinen, Rich Tegen, Beref Gallert," Julian said in German, his native tongue. "These waitresses get prettier, but unfortunately not smarter. She probably never learned a real profession." His associates chuckled obediently, though only one spoke German. Julian smiled, savoring the private joke at the waitress's expense. Amelia's expression remained professional as she placed water glasses on the table. Then, in flawless German, with a slight Bavarian accent, she responded, "Interessant dass Sie mein Intelligenz, an im Beref Mason, Herr Reinhardt. Beelegt wird, das Anna mehr über Begrenzungen als Bermin." Julian froze. Mid-sip. She had said, "Interesting that you measure my intelligence by my profession, Mr. Reinhardt. Perhaps this assumption reveals more about your limitations than mine." "Ihre Grammatik ist Brigands, nicht ganz korrekt," she added with a polite smile. "Your grammar isn't quite correct, by the way." The table fell silent. Julian's face flushed as he watched Amelia glide away to retrieve their wine, her posture impeccable, her dignity intact. "What did she say?" one investor asked. She... Julian cleared his throat. "She speaks German." For the first time in years, Julian Reinhardt found himself speechless, humbled by the very person he'd tried to diminish. And despite his embarrassment, or perhaps because of it, he couldn't take his eyes off her for the rest of the evening. 3 days later, Julian Reinhardt returned to Restaurant Lumiere alone. He told himself it was the exceptional wine list that drew him back, not the lingering embarrassment or curiosity about the waitress who had effortlessly dismantled his arrogance. The Maître recognized him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Reinhardt. Your usual table?" "No," Julian replied, scanning the restaurant. "Something more private?" He was seated in a quiet corner with a view of the entire floor. When he spotted Amelia serving another table, he felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. She moved with grace between tables, engaged in easy conversation with guests, and laughed genuinely at something an elderly patron said. When she approached his table, her professional smile shifted subtly. Recognition flickered in her eyes, but her composure remained unshaken. "Good evening, Mr. Reinhardt. Welcome back to Lumiere." "Thank you, Amelia." Her name felt strange on his tongue, intimate in a way he hadn't intended. "Are you expecting company tonight?" she asked, unfolding his napkin. "No, just me." She nodded, proceeding with her usual description of specials. This time, Julian listened, attentively noticing her precise vocabulary and thoughtful descriptions. "Darf ich fragen? Whoa, Sie so gut Deutsch gelernt haben?" he asked after ordering. "I ask where you learned German so well?" Amelia regarded him carefully before answering. "Mein Mutter ist Deutsch. Ich bin zweisprachig. Aufgewachsen." "My mother is German. I grew up bilingual, I see." Julian swirled his wine. "And what brought you to this restaurant?" The same thing that brings most people to their jobs, she replied. I need to pay my bills. If your language skills, you could work as a translator or in international business. Bold of you to assume I don't. Amelia's eyes held his. This is one of my jobs, not my only one. Julian felt a flicker of shame for his previous assumptions. I owe you an apology for the other night. You owe an apology to all service workers you've disrespected, not just the ones who happen to understand your insults. She maintained her professional tone, but her words carried weight. The conversation shifted when she asked about his wine preference, revealing an unexpected knowledge of German vineyards. Julian found himself engaged in the most stimulating conversation he'd had in months, between courses. He learned fragments of her story. She was completing her doctorate in comparative literature, specializing in German and Russian modernism. The restaurant work helped pay for her studies and her grandmother's medical bills. Why not ask your parents for help? Julian inquired. Not everyone has that luxury, she said simply. Some of us value independence. As the evening progressed, Julian realized Amelia viewed his wealth with complete indifference. Her respect couldn't be purchased. It had to be earned, a concept foreign to a man accustomed to deference based solely on his bank account. When she brought his check, Julian found himself reluctant for the evening to end. Will you be working tomorrow? He asked, surprising himself. Why do you ask? I'd like to continue our conversation. Perhaps over lunch. Amelia studied him, her expression unreadable. I don't date customers, Mr. Reinhardt. It's not a date, he said quickly. Consider it an apology. She slipped his receipt into a leather folder. I'm afraid I have classes tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your evening. As Julian watched her walk away, he realized he'd been dismissed politely, but firmly. For the first time in years, something he wanted wasn't immediately accessible. The sensation was both frustrating and strangely exhilarating. For 2 weeks, Julian found reasons to return to Lumiere. He discovered Amelia worked Thursday through Sunday evenings, information he casually extracted from other staff members. Each visit, their interactions grew longer, their conversations deeper. On his 5th visit, he arrived with a rare first edition of Rilke's poetry, peace offering that finally earned him a genuine smile from Amelia. This is thoughtful, she admitted, carefully examining the book during her break. Though I hope you didn't spend a fortune on it. Would that matter? Julian asked, watching her fingers trace the embossed cover. It would suggest you still believe everything has a price tag, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Tonight. Amelia seemed different, more tired, her usual vibrancy dimmed. When she accidentally dropped a water glass, Julian noticed her hands trembling slightly. Are you all right? He asked, when she returned with a replacement. Just a long day, she answered, her smile not reaching her eyes. My grandmother was moved to intensive care this morning. Julian felt an unfamiliar pang of genuine concern. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? Unless you can bend the rules of hospital bureaucracy or add more hours to the day? Probably not. She sighed. I'm sorry, that was unprofessional. It was honest, Julian replied. I prefer honesty to politeness. After his meal, Julian left a generous tip and a note with his personal number. For emergencies, he wrote, expecting she would. Never use it. 3 days later, his phone rang at midnight. Amelia's voice sounded small and exhausted. The hospital is transferring my grandmother to a specialized facility, but there's a waiting list. I've tried everything, ... Text me the details, Julian said immediately. I'll see what I can do. One call to a hospital board member later, Amelia's grandmother was moved to the top of the list. When Julian delivered this news, the line went silent. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. Julian considered the question. Because I can, he said simply. The next evening, Amelia was waiting outside his office building when he left work. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but there was something new in them when she looked at him, cautious trust. Thank you, she said. I don't know how to repay you. Have coffee with me, Julian suggested. Not at the restaurant, just somewhere normal. They found a small cafe where no one recognized Julian or catered to his status. Amelia ordered for them both in fluent Italian, surprising him yet again. For languages? He asked, impressed. 5, counting English, she corrected. My father was Italian. Languages came naturally, so afternoon faded into evening. Julian shared stories he'd never told anyone about growing up isolated in a wealthy German family, about building his company from scratch when his father cut him off, about the loneliness that persisted despite his success. People see the billion-dollar valuation, he admitted. They don't see the man behind it, and you prefer it that way, Amelia observed. Your arrogance is armor. Instead of feeling offended, Julian felt seen. What about you? What's your armor? Independence, she answered without hesitation. If I never need anyone, no one can disappoint me. Later, walking her to the subway, Julian realized they'd spent hours talking without once discussing business. Money or status topics that usually dominated his conversations? My grandmother wants to meet you, Amelia said suddenly. To thank you herself. I'd like that, Julian replied, surprised to find he meant it. As they stood on the crowded sidewalk, pedestrians streaming around them, Julian recognized the unfamiliar warmth expanding in his chest. For the first time in years, he wasn't Julian Reinhardt, tech billionaire. He was simply a man, standing before a woman who challenged him, fascinated him, and somehow made him want to be better. Same time next week? He asked. Amelia smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I'd like that. When Amelia accepted Julian's invitation to attend a charity gala, she hadn't anticipated the scrutiny that came with entering his world. The whispers followed them through the ballroom, speculation about who she was, what she wanted from him, how she'd managed to capture the attention of New York's most eligible bachelor. You look uncomfortable, Julian observed. Handing her a champagne flute, Amelia smoothed the borrowed designer gown she felt ridiculous wearing. I'm being dissected by every person in this room. They're just curious. You're something new in my life. Something or someone. She challenged, raising an eyebrow. Before Julian could respond, Bradford Wellington, a silver-haired venture capitalist, interrupted them. Julian finally decided to bring a date to one of these things. His appraising glance made Amelia feel like auction merchandise. Bradford, meet Amelia Rousseau. She's completing her doctorate in comparative literature. Fascinating, Bradford replied without interest. Julian, we need to discuss the Singapore merger. Choose us, my dear. As Julian was pulled away, Amelia found herself abandoned in a sea of wealth and privilege. She retreated to a quieter corner, observing the performative philanthropy around her. These people donated millions without blinking, yet something felt hollow about their generosity. You must be Julian's new project, said a sleek woman in her 40s, appearing beside Amelia. I'm Victoria Ashford. Julian and I have ... history. Congratulations, Amelia replied dryly. Victoria laughed, the sound practiced and cold. He has a pattern, you know, finding interesting, accomplished women from humble backgrounds. He elevates them, shows them off, then moves on when the novelty fades. Thank you for the warning, Amelia said, maintaining her composure, though I don't recall asking for your insight. Victoria's smile tightened. Just friendly advice. This isn't your world, darling. Eventually that becomes painfully obvious to everyone involved. When Julian finally returned, he found Amelia on the terrace, staring at the city lights. Sorry about that. Business never sleeps. Is that why you're alone, Julian? Because business is your most reliable companion? He blinked, caught off guard by her directness. What happened? I met Victoria. She was quite educational about your patterns. Julian's jaw tightened. Victoria and I dated briefly 3 years ago. She's not a reliable narrator. What? Maybe not. Amelia conceded. But this evening has been illuminating. The way people looked at me like I'm either a gold digger or your latest charitable cause. You're neither, Julian insisted.
You're what am I to you, Julian?
An interesting diversion, a challenge, is the waitress who dared to stand up to you? Her question hung between them, demanding an answer Julian wasn't prepared to give. In the weeks since they'd begun spending time together, he'd avoided defining what was developing between them. You're someone who sees me, he finally said. Not the money or the power, just me. Amelia shook her head. Thought. But that's the problem. I can't separate you from your world, and tonight made it clear I don't belong in it. The following week brought further complications. Tabloid published photos of them leaving a restaurant, the headlines speculating about Julian's romance with Waitress. Paparazzi began appearing outside Lumiere and even near her grandmother's care facility. When Julian called, Amelia was fuming. My dissertation advisor saw those photos. I was questioning my commitment to academia, and my grandmother's privacy has been invaded. I'll handle it, Julian promised. My legal team can? That's exactly it, Amelia interrupted. Oh, yeah. Solution to everything is throwing money or influence at it. That's not how the real world works, Julian. It's how my world works, he countered, frustration edging into his voice. And therein lies our problem, she said softly. I need space to think, Julian. Please respect that. After she hung up, Amelia sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by books and student loan statements. She thought about Julian, his complexity, his growing humility, the tenderness he showed her grandmother against the backdrop of his privilege and power. Meanwhile, Julian stood in his penthouse, staring at the city below. For the first time, his wealth felt like a barrier rather than an advantage. The realization left him feeling strangely hollow, his empire suddenly seeming empty without someone to share it with, someone who valued him for reasons that had nothing to do with money. 3 weeks passed without contact. Julian buried himself in work, negotiating deals with mechanical efficiency, while thoughts of Amelia lingered in the periphery of every decision. He found himself questioning practices he'd once taken for granted, the casual exploitation, the assumption of superiority, the distance he maintained from ordinary lives. Meanwhile, Amelia successfully defended her dissertation, earning praise that should have filled her with satisfaction. Instead, she found herself wishing Julian had been there to witness her achievement. Her grandmother noticed her distraction. Du vermisst. The elderly woman observed from her hospital bed. You miss him. It's complicated, Oma, Amelia sighed. Die Liebe ist immer kompliziert, her grandmother replied. Love is always complicated, but that doesn't mean you run from it. One rainy Tuesday evening, Amelia was shelving books at the university library, where she worked part-time, when she noticed a familiar figure browsing the German literature section. Julian stood examining a volume of Goethe, looking strangely out of place in his tailored suit among the students in sweatshirts. Most billionaires would just buy the book, she said, approaching him. Julian turned, his expression brightening at the sight of her. I needed to return something that belongs to you. He held out her copy of Rilke's letters that she'd lent him weeks ago. You could have mailed it, she pointed out. I wanted to see you, he admitted, and to tell you that you were right, Amelia. Leaned against the bookshelf. About what specifically? Everything. Julian's voice was quiet. About my world, about how I use wealth as a shield, about how I've never truly connected with people because I've never needed to. They moved to a quiet study room where rain tapped gently against the windows. Julian told her about changes he'd been making, establishing a foundation to support first-generation college students, restructuring his company's wage policies, volunteering at a literacy program. These are good changes, Amelia acknowledged. But why are you telling me? Because they're not about impressing you, Julian said. They're about becoming someone worthy of your respect, someone I can respect too. You don't need my validation. Julian? No. But I want your partnership. He met her gaze steadily. I've spent my life accumulating things that don't matter while missing what does. You showed me that. Amelia studied him. And what matters to you now? Connection. Purpose. Using my privilege for something meaningful. He paused. And you, if you'll give us another chance. I'm not moving into your penthouse, she warned. And I'm still planning to teach comparative literature, not become a trophy girlfriend. Julian smiled. I wouldn't want you any other way. 2 months later, they sat in a modest cafe in Berlin. Julian had business meetings and Amelia was presenting a paper at a literary conference. It found a rhythm to their relationship separate. Lives that intersected by choice rather than necessity. I spoke with my father yesterday, Julian mentioned, stirring his coffee. First time in 15 years? How did it go? Amelia asked. Surprisingly well. He's different now. older, less rigid. Julian looked thoughtful. Or maybe I'm the one who's changed. Du hast dich definitiv verändert, she agreed in German. You've definitely changed. Julian reached across the table for her hand. Dank dir. Thanks to you. 9. Amelia corrected him with a gentle smile. Dank uns. Thanks to us later as they walked along the Spree River, Julian reflected on their unlikely beginning, how his attempt to humiliate her had instead set him on a path to becoming a better man. The arrogant billionaire who had walked into Lumiere that night wouldn't recognize the person he was becoming. What are you thinking? About? Amelia asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Languages, Julian replied. Not just German or English, but the ones that really matter. It's the language of respect, seeing someone for who they truly are. Those are harder to master, she agreed. Worth the effort, though, he said, squeezing her hand. As evening fell over. Berlin. They continued walking, to people from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unexpected way. Their story wasn't about a wealthy man rescuing a waitress or a scholarly woman reforming a billionaire. It was simpler and more profound. Two individuals choosing to see beyond assumptions and status. Learning to speak the most difficult language of all, authentic connection.